The Mafia boss trashed the black Maid's belongings. The mansion went dead quiet. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to the story and meet our main character. Kendra Williams had worked as a maid in Vincent Moretti's mansion for over 2 years. She had seen it all, the lavish parties, the power struggles, the secrets hidden behind the golden walls. Yet, none of this bothered her. She was here to do her job, keep her head down, and stay invisible. But on this particular day, something was different. The air in the grand mansion was thick with tension. Vincent had just returned from a meeting with his associates, and he was furious. As Kendra quietly dusted the shelves in the grand hallway, she overheard heated voices coming from the living room. It was hard to ignore the shouting, but Kendra knew better than to eavesdrop. She moved swiftly, keeping her focus on her task. However, the tension in the house didn't fade. It only grew more intense. She could feel it in the way the servants moved around her, the way they avoided making eye contact. She knew Vincent's temper. She had seen it before. But what happened next was something she never expected. Without warning, Vincent stormed into the room where Kendra was working. His face was twisted with anger, and his eyes burned with fury. "You!" he shouted, pointing at her. "You've ruined everything." Kendra froze. Her heart pounded in her chest as she met his gaze. He was standing right in front of her now, his fists clenched. "What did I do, sir?" Kendra asked softly, trying to remain calm. But it didn't matter. In his rage, Vincent wasn't interested in explanations. He was only interested in taking out his frustration. He grabbed Kendra's belongings from her cart and threw them to the floor. Her personal items, a small bag with her belongings, a worn-out notebook, and a few other modest possessions, scattered across the floor. Kendra stood frozen, staring at the mess in disbelief. The silence in the room was deafening. For a moment, no one moved. Even the other staff members who had been rushing around seemed to stop in their tracks. The entire mansion had gone quiet, as if the very air had been sucked out of it. Kendra, despite the humiliation and the sting of the moment, kept her head held high. She didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't flinch. She simply stared back at Vincent, who was now breathing heavily, his anger still simmering. But something in the way Kendra stood, calm and unbroken, shifted the energy in the room. Vincent, for the first time, looked uncertain. His gaze flickered from Kendra to her belongings on the floor, and then to the faces of the other staff members, who were all too afraid to speak. There was a moment of silence, a breathless pause, before Vincent broke the stillness. He cursed under his breath and stormed out of the room, leaving Kendra standing in the midst of her scattered belongings. But the damage had been done. The room was still heavy with tension, but for the first time since Kendra had started working there, she felt something different. She wasn't invisible anymore. The sound of Vincent's footsteps faded, leaving Kendra standing alone in the stillness of the room. Her belongings, scattered on the floor, were a sharp reminder of the humiliation she had just endured. She could feel the weight of the silence pressing in on her, but instead of shrinking back, she stood tall, her gaze unwavering. She had worked for Vincent for over 2 years, and this was not the first time he had let his temper get the better of him. Yet, something about this moment felt different. Kendra had always kept her head down, focused on her work, but today, she could feel the shift inside her. As she bent down to collect her things, her mind raced. Vincent Moretti had built his empire on power, intimidation, and fear, and for the longest time, Kendra had been a small, invisible part of that empire. But no more. The sharpness in her chest, the indignation bubbling within her, was new. She had always been the quiet, invisible maid, just another face in the crowd of Vincent's sprawling mansion. But today, she had been pushed too far. She could feel the anger creeping up inside her, the desire for change. The sting of Vincent's words still echoed in her mind. His arrogance, his assumption that he could treat her however he pleased, had always been a part of the house. But it was clear to Kendra now that she couldn't let that continue. She straightened up, holding her belongings in her arms, and took a deep breath. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to feel something other than fear. Her eyes fell on the ornate furniture and luxurious decor around her, the grand chandeliers and expensive carpets that Vincent flaunted, symbols of his wealth and power. But what did they really mean? To Vincent, they were everything. To her, they were nothing but material things that could never give him the respect he demanded. It was the people who worked for him who mattered. It was the people he abused, the ones he discarded without a second thought, that had the real strength. As Kendra walked back to her small quarters in the servants' wing, the mansion felt different. The silence was no longer oppressive. It was a calm before the storm. She knew she would not stand by and let Vincent trample over her anymore. She had seen too much, witnessed too many of his ruthless actions. She knew the darkest corners of his business. Vincent had many secrets, and Kendra had been the silent observer for far too long. It was time to stop being silent. That night, as she lay in bed, Kendra couldn't shake the thoughts racing through her mind. She had always told herself to keep quiet, not to make waves. She had always believed that the best way to survive in this world was to stay invisible. But after what had just happened, after the way Vincent had humiliated her in front of everyone, she realized how wrong she had been. She was not invisible. She was strong. And she had a choice. The next day, Kendra decided to take action. She spent the morning gathering evidence, piecing together the information she had collected over the years. She knew that exposing Vincent's secrets would be risky, but she also knew that it was the only way to take back her power. She couldn't let him continue to destroy lives, to use fear to control people. She had been a part of that system for far too long, and now, she was going to be the one to bring it down. By the time the sun was setting, Kendra had a plan. She would confront Vincent, expose him for the monster he truly was. She would no longer be his silent servant, cowering in the shadows. She would make him see her for who she was, a woman with the courage to stand up to him. As she prepared for the confrontation, Kendra's heart raced. She knew that this could be the end of everything. Her job, her place in the mansion, even her safety. But she also knew that she couldn't go back. Not after what he had done. When the time came, she stood in front of Vincent's office door, taking a deep breath. She was ready. This time, she wasn't going to let him walk all over her. She was going to take control of her own destiny. And when Vincent opened the door, she would be the one standing tall, facing him with the strength and power she had always had inside her. The next morning, Kendra stood in front of Vincent's office door, her heart pounding in her chest. She had spent the entire night going over her plan, rehearsing every word she would say, every move she would make. She knew what was at stake. She was about to challenge a man who had built his life on power, fear, and manipulation. But for the first time in years, Kendra wasn't afraid. She had seen the worst of Vincent's world. She had witnessed his cruelty, his disregard for the lives of others. But now, it was time for him to see the truth. Kendra took a deep breath, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for the door handle. She could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on her, but she was determined. This was her chance to finally take control of her own fate. As she stepped into the office, Vincent looked up from his desk, his expression cold and unreadable. For a moment, he said nothing, studying her as if trying to determine what she was doing there. The silence stretched on, but Kendra didn't flinch. She stood her ground, meeting his gaze with the same intensity she had carried inside her since the previous day. Vincent leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk, a sign of his impatience. "What is it, Kendra?" he finally asked, his tone laced with annoyance. "What do you want?" Kendra took a step forward, her voice steady as she spoke. "I want to talk about what happened yesterday." Vincent's eyebrows shot up, but he didn't interrupt. He just sat there, watching her carefully. "You humiliated me," she continued, her words carrying the weight of all the years of being overlooked and disrespected. "You trashed my belongings, made me feel worthless. But you need to understand something." She paused, gathering her thoughts, knowing this was the moment to make her stand. "I'm not invisible anymore." Vincent's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something, perhaps surprise, perhaps disbelief, crossing his face. He opened his mouth to speak, but Kendra raised her hand, silencing him. "I know your secrets, Vincent," she said, her voice low but firm. "I've seen the way you've treated people, the way you've used fear and intimidation to get what you want. But you've underestimated me." She could see the muscles in his jaw tighten, his fists clenching slightly as if he were about to lash out. But Kendra didn't back down. She stepped closer, her words cutting through the tension in the room. "I've been quiet for too long. But not anymore." Vincent finally stood up, his chair scraping across the floor with a sharp noise. He towered over her, his presence commanding and overwhelming. For a moment, it seemed like he might strike out, that he might let his anger get the better of him again. But instead, he paused. Kendra could see the conflict in his eyes. He didn't know how to handle this new version of her. "You think you can just walk in here and demand respect?" Vincent's voice was low, threatening. But Kendra wasn't intimidated. "I don't need your respect," she said, her voice unwavering. "But you're going to get it, whether you like it or not." The silence that followed was thick with tension, the air crackling with unspoken words. Vincent stared at her for what felt like an eternity before his shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. He turned away, walking to the large window behind his desk, his back to her. Kendra could see the weight of his thoughts, the realization that something had shifted in him. "You've changed," he muttered under his breath. Kendra didn't need him to say anything more. She had already won. This was her moment of victory, not in the sense of revenge, but in the sense of reclaiming her own power. She had taken the first step toward her freedom. She had finally made herself visible, and there was no going back. Without another word, Kendra turned and walked out of the office, leaving Vincent standing there, his back still turned to her. As she walked down the hallway, a sense of peace settled over her. The mansion, once a place of oppression, now felt different. The walls that had once felt suffocating now seemed to hold the possibility of change. Kendra had no idea what would come next, but for the first time in her life, she felt in control. She had finally broken free from the chains that had bound her for so long. The days following Kendra's confrontation with Vincent were filled with a strange mix of uncertainty and newfound confidence. She had expected some form of retaliation, but instead, the mansion seemed to fall into an uneasy silence. Vincent had not spoken to her directly since that day, and neither had anyone else in the household. It was as though the air itself had shifted, and Kendra was no longer just another invisible figure in the background. She was now someone who commanded attention. As the weeks passed, Kendra's presence in the mansion began to change. The other staff members, once distant and fearful, started to look at her differently. They no longer avoided her gaze, and some even offered small nods of respect when she passed by. It was subtle, but it was there. Kendra had earned something she had never expected, the respect of her peers. Vincent, on the other hand, seemed to be a different person. Gone was the arrogance that had once defined him. Gone was the man who would storm through the mansion, barking orders and lashing out at anyone who crossed him. Now, he was quiet, withdrawn, almost as if he were waiting for something. Kendra wasn't sure what it was, but she could feel it. There was a tension in the air whenever Vincent was around, and it made her uneasy. She had thought that confronting him would bring some form of closure, but instead, it had opened up a new world of uncertainty. What would happen now? Would Vincent try to regain control, or had she truly broken free of his grip? One evening, as Kendra was finishing her shift, she was summoned to Vincent's office. The request came through one of the staff members, and there was no explanation given. Kendra's heart skipped a beat. She had not expected to be called back into his presence so soon. As she walked down the long hallway to his office, she couldn't help but feel a sense of dread creeping up inside her. The mansion, once a place of comfort and routine, now felt like a labyrinth of tension and secrets. She knocked on the door and waited for Vincent's voice to call her in. When she stepped inside, she was surprised to see that he was sitting at his desk, looking at a set of papers, as though he hadn't noticed her arrival. For a moment, she hesitated, wondering if she should say something. But instead, she stood there in silence, waiting for him to acknowledge her. Vincent didn't look up at first. He simply continued to study the documents in front of him, as if deep in thought. The minutes stretched on, and Kendra began to feel uncomfortable. She was about to speak when he finally looked up, his eyes meeting hers. There was no anger in his gaze, no coldness. Instead, there was something different. Something she couldn't quite place. "Kendra," Vincent said quietly, his voice softer than she had ever heard it before. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how I've treated people." Kendra's heart raced. This was not the response she had expected. She had braced herself for another outburst, for him to belittle her again. but instead, he seemed apologetic. "I've made a lot of mistakes," he continued, his tone still steady. "I've been too focused on power and control, and I've hurt a lot of people along the way." "I've hurt you." Kendra didn't know how to respond. She had never heard Vincent speak like this before. It was as though a different person was sitting across from her. But despite the unexpectedness of his words, a part of her didn't trust him. She had seen his true nature before, and a few kind words wouldn't change that. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Vincent said, breaking through her thoughts. "But I want to make things right. I want to start over." Kendra stood there, unsure of what to say. She had spent so much time in this mansion, living under Vincent's control, that the idea of him changing was hard to believe. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore the possibility that something had truly shifted in him. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't sure where this would lead. "I've arranged for you to receive a raise," Vincent said, still looking at her. "And a promotion. You'll no longer just be a maid. You'll be in charge of overseeing the other staff members. I know it's not enough, but it's a start." Kendra was taken aback. She had never imagined that she would be offered such an opportunity. For so long, she had simply tried to survive, to make it through each day without drawing attention to herself. But now, Vincent was offering her something more. It wasn't just the raise or the promotion that caught her attention, though. It was the fact that he had acknowledged her value, her worth. For the first time, she felt like she was more than just a servant in his mansion. She was someone who could make a difference. As she left Vincent's office that evening, Kendra's mind was spinning. She had not expected this conversation, nor the offer he had made. But now, she had a choice. She could accept his offer, move forward with a new role and new responsibilities, or she could walk away. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel powerless. The future was in her hands, and for the first time, she had the chance to truly take control of her own destiny. As the days passed, Kendra couldn't shake the feeling that things were changing in ways she couldn't predict. The mansion, once a place of cold indifference, now felt different. Almost like a stage, with her in the center of it, holding the script. Vincent's offer, the raise, and the promotion were all real, but the weight of responsibility that came with it was starting to settle heavily on her shoulders. She had always been a maid, never meant to stand out, never expected to lead. But now, she was in charge of overseeing the other staff members. The idea was daunting, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of purpose. That evening, as she walked through the mansion, she passed by the other staff members, cleaners, cooks, gardeners, and for the first time, they didn't avert their eyes when they saw her. They looked at her as though she belonged, as though she had the right to be there, in charge. Kendra had spent so many years invisible, just another part of the background, that she wasn't sure how to navigate this new reality. What would they expect from her? What kind of leader would she be? She didn't have the answers, but she was determined to figure it out. The next morning, Kendra gathered the staff together for the first time as their supervisor. The room was quiet as they all looked at her, some with curiosity, some with skepticism. Kendra could feel the weight of their eyes on her, and for a moment, she almost lost her nerve. But then she remembered what she had gone through, the strength she had found in herself, and she spoke. "I know that this is a new dynamic," she said, her voice steady. "And I know that some of you may not trust me or believe that I'm the right person for this job. But I'm here to make things better. For all of us." She paused, letting the words sink in. "I want us to work together, to create a team that respects one another and values each other's contributions. We all have a role to play here, and we deserve to be treated with respect." The room was still, but Kendra could see the change in their faces. There was a shift, a subtle acknowledgement that they were willing to give her a chance. For the first time, Kendra felt like she belonged in this space. The rest of the meeting went smoothly. She laid out her expectations for the staff, discussed the changes she wanted to implement, and listened to their concerns. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Over the next few weeks, Kendra worked hard to earn the respect of the staff. She made sure that everyone's voices were heard, that their concerns were addressed, and that they felt valued. She held meetings with each department, asking for feedback, offering support, and making sure that no one was left behind. As time went on, the mansion started to feel like a place of collaboration instead of fear. The staff became more united, more willing to help each other, and more respectful of one another. It wasn't just about the tasks anymore. It was about creating an environment where everyone felt like they mattered. Vincent noticed the changes as well. He didn't speak about it directly, but Kendra could tell by the way he watched her, the way his demeanor softened when he saw her interacting with the staff. It was as if he was seeing her in a new light, one that he had never bothered to notice before. One afternoon, as Kendra was overseeing the preparation for a large dinner party in the mansion's grand dining room, Vincent approached her. He wasn't angry, nor was he dismissive. Instead, he seemed curious. "You've done well," he said, his voice low. "The staff, they're more organized, more efficient." Kendra didn't know how to respond at first. She had never expected praise from Vincent, not after all the years of being overlooked. But she kept her composure, nodding politely. "Thank you, sir," she replied. Vincent hesitated for a moment, as though weighing something in his mind. Then, he spoke again, his tone almost reluctant. "I didn't expect you to be this capable." Kendra's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't let her emotions show. "I'm just doing my job," she said simply, keeping her voice steady. Vincent nodded, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer before he turned to leave. As Kendra watched him walk away, she realized something. She had never sought Vincent's approval. She had never needed it. But hearing him acknowledge her efforts, even if it was just in passing, felt like a victory in itself. It wasn't about the power he held over her anymore. It was about the respect she had earned through her own actions. That evening, as she sat alone in her quarters, Kendra reflected on everything that had changed in such a short amount of time. The mansion, once a place of shadows, now felt like a space she had carved out for herself. She was no longer just the invisible maid, the person no one noticed. She was someone who had made a difference, someone who had taken control of her own destiny. And as she lay down to sleep that night, for the first time in years, she felt at peace with who she had become. As weeks went by, Kendra's role in the mansion continued to evolve. The staff had started to trust her more, and the once tense atmosphere in the house was gradually replaced with one of mutual respect. She was no longer just the maid. She had become a leader in her own right. It was strange to see how far she had come, especially considering where she had started. Kendra, who had once quietly moved through the halls, keeping her head down, now walked with purpose, holding her head high. She had made a difference, not only in her own life, but in the lives of those around her. Even Vincent, who had initially treated her like just another part of the background, seemed to have a different view of her now. While he remained distant and reserved, there was a subtle shift in how he interacted with her. There was no more contempt in his voice when he spoke to her, and he even began to offer suggestions on how to improve the staff's efficiency. It wasn't the friendship Kendra had hoped for, but it was a sign that he had, in some way, begun to acknowledge her. One day, Vincent summoned Kendra to his office once again. This time, she didn't feel the same nervousness she had before. The power dynamics in the mansion had shifted, and she knew that she no longer had to fear him. She knocked on the door and waited for his voice to beckon her inside. "Come in," Vincent said, his voice steady but not unkind. Kendra opened the door and stepped inside, closing it softly behind her. Vincent was sitting behind his desk, looking over some paperwork, but he looked up as soon as she entered. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Kendra hesitated for a moment before sitting down. "What is it, sir?" she asked, keeping her tone respectful but calm. Vincent set the papers aside and looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "I've been watching you, Kendra," he began, his voice slow. "I've been seeing the changes you've made. The staff is working better, the atmosphere is more positive. I didn't think you had it in you." Kendra felt a small sense of pride welling up inside her. It wasn't often that Vincent gave compliments, and to hear him acknowledge her efforts was a reminder of how far she had come. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I just did what needed to be done." Vincent nodded, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than usual. "I think you deserve more than what you've been given," he said, his voice carrying a weight of seriousness. Kendra frowned, unsure of where this conversation was going. "More than what I've been given," she repeated. Vincent leaned forward, his fingers steepled together. "I've decided to give you a raise, Kendra. A significant one." Kendra's eyes widened in surprise. She hadn't expected that. Vincent, the man who had treated her like nothing more than a servant, was offering her more. It was almost too much to comprehend. "I also think it's time you moved up in the world, Kendra," he continued. "You've earned my respect, and I'm going to give you the opportunity to expand your role here." You'll be overseeing the entire household staff from now on. Kendra sat there in stunned silence. The offer was more than she had ever hoped for. It wasn't just the raise, though that was significant. It was the recognition that she was more than just a maid. She was someone who had proven herself capable of leading others. I don't know what to say, Kendra finally managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. You don't have to say anything, Vincent said, his tone softening. Just keep doing what you're doing. I trust you. Kendra felt a rush of gratitude mixed with disbelief. The offer was one she never would have imagined receiving from Vincent, the man who had once belittled her, who had once treated her like nothing. It was a moment that marked a turning point in her life. She had proven herself not only to Vincent, but to herself as well. As she left his office that day, Kendra couldn't help but feel a sense of pride swelling in her chest. She had come so far from the quiet, invisible maid she had once been. She had faced the very man who had treated her with disdain, and now, he was offering her the chance to shape her own future. The next few days were filled with a whirlwind of activity. Kendra was busy organizing the staff, setting new expectations, and making changes that she knew would lead to a more harmonious and efficient environment. She had a vision for the household, one where respect and fairness were at the forefront. But even as she moved forward, Kendra couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed in such a short time. She had once been a pawn in a game she didn't understand, but now, she was in control of her own destiny. She was no longer just the maid. She was a leader, someone who had earned her place. And as she stood in the grand hallway of the mansion one evening, looking around at the staff working together seamlessly, she realized that she had found a home in this mansion, a home where she finally belonged. As the weeks continued, Kendra's confidence grew with each passing day. The changes she had made in the mansion, both in how the staff worked together and in how they treated one another, were becoming increasingly apparent. Vincent had given her the authority she had always lacked, and she was beginning to flourish in her new role. She no longer felt like the invisible servant in the background. Instead, she was the one who set the tone for the household. Her leadership was clear, and it was starting to show in the attitudes of the staff. They respected her, and she had earned their trust. It wasn't always easy, of course. There were still moments of tension, moments where she had to remind herself of her worth and the reasons why she had fought so hard to get here. But she had learned to stand firm, to make decisions without hesitation. And every time she did, she felt more and more like she belonged in this space. Vincent, too, had become less distant. While he wasn't particularly warm, he no longer treated her with the same coldness he once had. There were times when he even asked for her opinion, and for the first time, Kendra found herself feeling like her voice mattered. It was a small thing, but it was significant. She had come so far from the woman who had been nothing more than a silent observer in his world. One afternoon, as Kendra was making her rounds in the mansion, she was stopped by one of the housekeepers, Marie, who had a look of concern on her face. "Kendra, there's something you need to see," Marie said, her voice low. "It's Vincent. He's been acting strange." Kendra frowned, a feeling of unease settling in her stomach. "Strange how?" she asked. Marie hesitated for a moment before answering. "He's been watching you, staring at you when you're not looking. I don't know how to explain it, but it's like he's waiting for something." Kendra felt a chill run down her spine. She had noticed that Vincent had been quieter lately, but she hadn't thought much of it. He had always been a man of few words, but this felt different. "Thanks for telling me, Marie," Kendra said, giving the woman a reassuring smile. "I'll keep an eye on him." Later that evening, as Kendra was finishing up her duties, she found herself in the kitchen, gathering some paperwork for Vincent's next meeting. As she walked past the study, she saw him standing in the doorway, his back to her. He was staring out the window, his hands clasped behind his back. For a moment, she hesitated. She could feel his presence, a weight in the air that was almost suffocating. But she didn't turn away. She had no reason to fear him anymore. She approached him slowly, her footsteps echoing in the silence. "Vincent," she called softly. He didn't respond at first, but then he turned, his face unreadable. "You're still working late," he said, his voice almost detached. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt," Kendra said, standing a few steps away from him. She wasn't sure why she was suddenly feeling so uneasy. Vincent studied her for a moment, his gaze intense, but not unfriendly. "It's fine," he said, his tone neutral. I've just been thinking. Kendra frowned, sensing that there was more to his words than he was letting on. Thinking about what? She asked cautiously. Vincent paused, his eyes softening slightly as he looked at her. About you, he said, his voice low. You've changed everything here. You've changed me. Kendra's heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, she didn't know how to respond. She had never expected to hear those words from Vincent, the man who had once looked down on her, who had treated her like she was nothing. I don't know what you mean, she said, her voice steady despite the rush of emotions flooding through her. Vincent took a step closer, his expression serious. I've watched you, he said quietly. I've seen how you've transformed this place, how you've made the staff respect you. I don't know if you realize it, but you've done something more than just manage them. You've earned their trust. You've earned my trust. Kendra's mind raced. She hadn't expected this kind of conversation. She had always known Vincent as a man who thrived on control, who never showed vulnerability. But now, as he spoke, she could see a shift in him. He was no longer the same man who had humiliated her, who had belittled her at every turn. I've been thinking about how I treated you, Vincent continued, his voice growing softer. And I realize I was wrong. I shouldn't have treated you that way. You've proven yourself more than I ever gave you credit for. Kendra felt a wave of disbelief wash over her. Was this really happening? Was Vincent, the man who had always been so cold and calculating, actually admitting that he had been wrong? Thank you, she said quietly, unsure of how else to respond. Vincent nodded, his eyes searching hers for a moment. I hope you know that I'm not saying this because I feel sorry for you, he said, his voice firm. I'm saying it because you've earned it. You've earned my respect. Kendra stood there, taking in his words. She had never imagined this moment, never expected Vincent to acknowledge her in this way. It was almost too much to process. But as she looked at him, she realized that it didn't matter what he had said in the past. What mattered was that she had made it this far. She had earned her place in this mansion, and she had earned his respect. For the first time in her life, Kendra felt truly seen. As the days turned into weeks, Kendra found herself slowly becoming more comfortable in her new role. Her confidence had grown immensely since Vincent's unexpected words of acknowledgement. She had earned the respect of the staff, and she could feel the difference in how they interacted with her. They no longer saw her as just a maid. She had become their leader, someone they looked to for guidance and support. The mansion itself, once a cold and imposing place, now felt like a home that she had helped to build. Kendra had proven to herself and to others that she was capable of more than just cleaning and serving. She had taken charge and made a real difference. But even as she basked in the newfound respect of the staff, there was still a part of her that was unsure of Vincent's true intentions. He had offered her the promotion and the raise, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he was still holding something back. He had been kinder, more respectful, but she knew better than to let her guard down completely. Vincent was not a man who easily showed vulnerability, and she was still waiting for the other shoe to drop. One afternoon, as she walked through the hallway of the mansion, Kendra was approached by Marie again. The older housekeeper had a concerned look on her face, and Kendra could tell something was troubling her. Kendra, I've noticed something, Marie said, her voice low. Vincent's been acting strange again. He's been spending more time locked in his study, and he won't talk to anyone. I think something's going on. Kendra's heart skipped a beat. She had hoped that Vincent's strange behavior was just a passing phase, but now it seemed that something more was at play. Have you heard anything specific? Kendra asked, trying to keep her voice steady. I don't know for sure, but there's a feeling in the air, Kendra, Marie replied, glancing around as if to make sure no one was listening. People are starting to talk. The staff is nervous, and I think Vincent's getting more agitated. Kendra nodded, a feeling of unease settling in her stomach. She had seen Vincent at his most volatile, and she didn't want to face that side of him again. Thank you for letting me know, Marie, Kendra said, her voice calm. I'll keep an eye on him. That night, as Kendra sat in her quarters, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Vincent's sudden withdrawal from the rest of the household was unsettling, and it was clear that something was off. She had worked hard to build the respect and trust of the staff, and she wasn't about to let Vincent's moods disrupt everything she had worked for. The next day, Kendra made her way to Vincent's study. She had decided that it was time to confront him, to figure out what was going on. She knocked on the door, waiting for his response. Come in, came his voice, cold and distant. Kendra stepped inside, finding him standing by the window, staring out at the grounds of the mansion. He didn't turn to face her as she entered. "Vincent," Kendra said softly but firmly, "I need to know what's going on. You've been distant, and the staff is starting to notice. If something's wrong, we need to talk about it." Vincent didn't move at first. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, slowly, he turned to face her. His expression was unreadable, and Kendra couldn't tell if he was angry or conflicted. "I don't know what you're talking about," Vincent said, his voice low. Kendra stood her ground, refusing to back down. "I can feel it, Vincent," she said. "You've been withdrawing. The staff can feel it too. If something's wrong, you need to let me help." For a long moment, Vincent said nothing. Then, he sighed, a sound that was almost defeated. "It's not something you can help with, Kendra," he said, his tone weary. "I've made too many mistakes. The things I've done, the people I've hurt. I don't know if I can make it right." Kendra's heart softened as she looked at him. She had never seen him like this before. Vincent, the man who had once seemed invincible, was now standing before her, vulnerable and broken. "You've already started making it right," Kendra said, her voice gentle. "You've changed. You've respected the staff, and you've treated me differently. That's a start." Vincent looked at her for a long time, his eyes searching hers as if trying to find some reassurance in her words. Finally, he spoke, his voice almost a whisper. "I don't know if I deserve to be forgiven," he said. "I've hurt so many people, and now, I don't know how to fix it." Kendra stepped closer, her heart aching for him. "It's not about being perfect, Vincent," she said. "It's about recognizing your mistakes and doing the work to make things better. You've already taken the first step." Vincent's eyes softened, and for the first time in a long while, he seemed to relax. The tension in the room slowly lifted, and Kendra realized that the power dynamic had shifted once again. This time, it wasn't about fear or control. It was about understanding and redemption. As she left Vincent's study that evening, Kendra couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. She had faced down the man who had once been her oppressor, and now, for the first time, she felt like there was a path forward, one where both of them could change for the better. She didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time, she felt ready to face it. Days turned into weeks, and Kendra found herself increasingly settled into her new role. She had gained the trust of the staff and earned Vincent's respect. What had once been a cold and oppressive environment in the mansion had started to change, becoming a place where Kendra felt in control, not just of her own life, but of the lives of those around her. The respect of the staff was no small feat. Many had spent years under the same strict rules, living in the shadow of Vincent's authority. But Kendra had shown them a different way, a way based on respect and understanding rather than fear. The change was subtle but powerful. As Kendra moved through the halls of the mansion, she noticed the differences in the way people interacted with her. The other staff members no longer avoided her gaze or whispered behind her back. They looked at her with respect, sometimes even admiration. The power dynamic in the mansion had shifted, and Kendra was no longer the invisible maid. She was a leader, someone who had proven herself capable and strong. Despite her success, Kendra couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. Vincent had been distant for a while now, and while he no longer treated her with the same coldness, there was a lingering sense of tension. He was quieter, more withdrawn, and Kendra wasn't sure if it was because of her success or because of something else. One evening, after finishing her duties, Kendra found herself alone in the kitchen, organizing some of the paperwork for Vincent's upcoming meetings. As she worked, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Vincent standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice soft but carrying a weight she hadn't heard before. Kendra felt her heart skip a beat. She had gotten used to Vincent being distant, but there was something different in his tone now. "Of course," she said, setting down the papers and standing up. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew that this conversation would be important. Vincent stepped into the kitchen, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was heavy, thick with unspoken words. Finally, Vincent broke the quiet. "I've been thinking a lot," he began, his gaze dropping to the floor for a moment before he met her eyes again. "About everything. About the changes you've made. About me." Kendra frowned slightly, sensing the tension in his voice. "What do you mean?" she asked carefully. Vincent sighed, the sound low and almost weary. I don't know how to explain it, Kendra, but I've been feeling conflicted. Kendra's heart began to race. She had never seen Vincent so vulnerable before, so unsure. He had always been the one in control, the one who made the rules. To see him like this was both surprising and unsettling. You've done more than I could have ever imagined, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. You've made this place work. You've earned the staff's trust, and you've earned my respect. But there's something I need to tell you, something I haven't said before. Kendra stood still, unsure of where this conversation was heading. What is it? She asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil she felt inside. Vincent hesitated for a moment before speaking again. I've always been a man of power, of control, he said, his voice almost regretful. But I've come to realize that I've been controlling the wrong things. I've spent my life building an empire, but at the cost of everything else. The people around me, the ones I should have cared about, I pushed them away. I pushed you away. Kendra's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected him to say that. She had always known that Vincent was a man who valued power above all else. But hearing him admit that he had made mistakes, that he had pushed people away, was something entirely different. Vincent, she began, her voice soft. I know you've done things in the past that you regret. We all have our mistakes. But what matters is what you do now. You've already started making things right. Vincent's eyes softened as he looked at her. You're right, he said quietly. But I still don't know if it's enough. I don't know if I can change everything I've built. Kendra stepped closer to him, her voice gentle but firm. It's not about changing everything, Vincent, she said. It's about taking responsibility for what you've done and doing what you can to make things better. No one expects you to be perfect, but you've already taken the first step. There was a long pause as Vincent looked at her, his expression a mixture of uncertainty and gratitude. Then, slowly he nodded. Thank you, Kendra, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You've shown me something I never expected to see. You've shown me what it means to be a leader, to truly care about the people around you. Kendra didn't know what to say. She had never expected Vincent to open up to her in this way, to show this level of vulnerability. But in that moment, she realized that he was not just the man who had once treated her like nothing. He was a person, someone who had made mistakes but was now willing to change. As she stood there, looking at him, Kendra realized that she had found something she hadn't expected in this mansion. It wasn't just the power or the respect. It was the chance to make a real difference, not just in her own life, but in Vincent's as well. The journey wasn't over, and there would still be challenges ahead. But for the first time, Kendra felt hopeful. She had made it this far, and now, she was ready to face whatever came next. As the days passed, Kendra found herself adjusting to the changes that had come with her new role. The mansion, which had once felt like a cold, intimidating place, now seemed more like a home. The staff had come together, and Kendra had become the glue that held them all together. They respected her, trusted her, and for the first time in a long time, Kendra felt like she truly belonged. But there was still one person she couldn't quite figure out, Vincent. Despite the moments of vulnerability he had shown, the kindness he had begun to extend, something still lingered between them. It wasn't exactly tension, but there was an unspoken understanding, a quiet space between them that neither seemed willing to cross. Vincent had always been a man of control, and Kendra knew that the power he had wielded for so long was not something he could simply give up. She wondered if his newfound respect for her was part of a shift in his character, or if he was just playing a part, trying to maintain his dominance in a new way. One evening, after a particularly successful meeting with the staff where Kendra had laid out new plans for improvements, she was walking down the long corridor toward her quarters when she saw Vincent standing at the end of the hallway, near the grand staircase. He wasn't in his usual suit, but in something more casual, a look Kendra wasn't used to seeing on him. He looked almost approachable. She hesitated, wondering if she should stop or continue on her way, but Vincent caught her eye and motioned for her to come over. Kendra, he said, his voice low, but with an almost unrecognizable warmth. I've been meaning to speak with you. She paused, then walked toward him. About what? She asked, trying to keep her tone neutral, though she couldn't help the curiosity that had peaked inside her. Vincent took a breath and looked at her for a moment, as if weighing his words. I know I've not been the easiest person to work with, he started, his tone carrying a hint of regret. And I'm sure I've made mistakes. But I need you to understand something. Kendra raised an eyebrow, unsure of where this conversation was headed. "What's that?" she asked, her voice steady. Vincent's eyes softened as he continued. "I've spent so many years building this place, building my empire, that I forgot what it was like to care about the people in it. To care about the people who make it work. You've changed that. You've made me see what I've been missing." Kendra was taken aback. She hadn't expected him to admit such things, to be so open with her. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. "I didn't ask for any of this," Vincent continued, a slight chuckle escaping his lips. "But I've realized that I've been looking at things the wrong way. And you've helped me understand what it means to be a leader. To care about the people who are following you." Kendra stood there, absorbing his words. She had spent so many years under his thumb, always wary of his unpredictable nature. But now, hearing him speak this way, something shifted inside her. She had always been taught to be cautious, to protect herself, but this side of Vincent was new. It was raw, vulnerable, and in a strange way, it made her feel like she could trust him. "You've earned my respect, Kendra," he added, his voice quieter now, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "And I know I've been hard on you, but I want you to know that I see you. I see the work you've done here. I see you." Kendra didn't know how to respond. She had worked so hard for this, for the respect and trust of the people around her. But hearing Vincent, of all people, acknowledge her efforts, it was more than she had ever expected. For the first time, it felt like she wasn't just a part of his world. She was in control of her own. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice catching slightly. I appreciate that." Vincent nodded, his expression serious but no longer cold. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said, his voice low. "But I want you to know that I recognize what I've done, and I'm trying to make it right. With you. With everyone." Kendra didn't know what to say to that. She had spent so many years wanting his approval, wanting to prove herself, but now she realized that it wasn't his approval she needed. It was her own, and she had already proven to herself that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. Vincent looked at her for a moment longer before finally speaking again. "You've done more than I ever thought possible, Kendra. You've made this place work. And I think it's time for me to step back." Kendra blinked, unsure of what he meant. "Step back?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Vincent nodded, his gaze distant. "I've been in control for so long that I've forgotten how to let go. But I think you're ready to take the reins." Kendra's heart skipped a beat. Was this it? Was this her chance to take complete control of the mansion, of her own destiny? "I'm not asking you to do this alone," Vincent said, almost as if reading her thoughts. "But I trust you now, more than I've ever trusted anyone." Kendra stood there, feeling a mix of emotions swirling inside her. She had come so far, and now, it seemed like she was on the brink of something even bigger. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, she felt ready to face it head-on. As Vincent turned to leave, he looked back at her with a final, almost approving nod. "You've earned it, Kendra," he said quietly, before walking away. Kendra watched him go, the weight of his words settling in her chest. She had earned it. The mansion was no longer just Vincent's. It was hers, too. As the days turned into weeks, Kendra felt the weight of her new responsibilities settling into place. The mansion, which had once been a symbol of oppression, now felt like a place where she could truly make a difference. The staff, once fearful of Vincent and the rigid expectations he had set, now looked to Kendra for leadership. They trusted her, respected her, and for the first time, Kendra felt like she was in control of her own destiny. It wasn't an easy transition. There were still moments of doubt, moments when Kendra wondered if she was doing the right thing, if she was truly capable of taking on the mantle of leadership in this grand mansion. But with each passing day, she proved to herself and to those around her that she was more than capable. The staff followed her lead, and the atmosphere in the mansion shifted. People worked together, not out of fear, but out of respect. Kendra had created a space where collaboration was valued, where kindness was at the forefront. And yet, despite all the progress, there was still a part of Kendra that felt unsettled. Vincent had stepped back, but his presence was still looming. Even though he had given her control, even though he had acknowledged her worth, there was an unspoken tension between them. Kendra had worked so hard to get to this point, to prove herself, but a part of her still wondered if Vincent was watching her, waiting for her to fail. It was that uncertainty that kept her up at night. One evening, As she was finishing up her work in the study, she found herself face to face with Vincent again. He was standing near the door, looking at her, his expression unreadable. Kendra took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had worked so hard to get to this point, and she wasn't about to let doubt get in the way now. "Vincent," she said, her voice steady but soft. "Is there something you need?" Vincent paused for a moment before speaking. "I've been watching," he said, his voice calm, but with a weight Kendra couldn't quite place. "And I've been thinking." Kendra's heart skipped a beat. She had expected him to be distant, to be cold, but now there was something different in his tone. Something that made her uneasy. "About what?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Vincent took a step closer, his eyes searching hers. "About how things have changed," he said slowly. "About how you've changed everything." Kendra didn't know what to say. She had worked so hard to change the dynamics in the mansion, but hearing Vincent say it like that made her feel as though there was more to his words. "I've seen how the staff respects you," he continued, his gaze never leaving hers. "And I've seen how they look to you for guidance. I can't deny that you've done what I never thought possible." Kendra felt a knot form in her stomach. This wasn't the conversation she had expected. She had worked for so long, under Vincent's thumb, to get to this point, but now it seemed like he was questioning her all over again. "Vincent," she began, her voice quieter now, "I've done what I've done because it's what was needed. I didn't ask for your approval." Vincent's expression shifted slightly, his lips pressing into a thin line. "I know you didn't," he said, his voice low, "but I think it's time I acknowledged something. I've been holding on to control for far too long, and maybe it's time I let go." Kendra felt a surge of something, maybe hope, maybe doubt, but she wasn't sure. Vincent was speaking in a way that made her feel like there was more coming, something deeper than what he was letting on. "I've made mistakes, Kendra," he said, his voice softer now. "I've hurt people. I've hurt you, and I can't undo the past. But I can do better." Kendra stood there in silence, her heart racing. She had never expected Vincent to admit his faults, especially not to her. It was as though the man who had once been a towering figure of power and control was now standing before her, vulnerable and uncertain. "I'm giving you full control," Vincent said, his words carrying a finality that left Kendra speechless. "Everything. The staff, the operations, the decisions. I trust you to run this place. And I'm stepping back completely." Kendra stared at him, unable to fully process what he had just said. For years, she had worked under him, had endured his cruelty and indifference. But now, in a single moment, he was offering her everything. Power, control, freedom. She didn't know what to say, what to do. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm willing to try." Vincent nodded, his eyes softening. "I believe you can. You've already proven yourself." With those words, Vincent turned and walked away, leaving Kendra standing there in the quiet study. She felt the weight of his words, the weight of the responsibility that now rested on her shoulders. For so long, she had been under his thumb, waiting for the moment when she would finally break free. And now, that moment had come. The mansion, once a place of fear, now belonged to her. She had earned it. She had worked for it. And now, it was hers to lead. Kendra took a deep breath and looked out the window, her heart still pounding in her chest. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt ready to face it. She was in control now, and there was nothing holding her back. The mansion had never felt so quiet. It was as if the air had shifted completely, the weight of new responsibilities settling on Kendra's shoulders. She had spent so many years under Vincent's thumb, following his every order, but now the power was in her hands. The mansion, the staff, everything was now hers to command. And as she walked through the halls, she couldn't help but feel the magnitude of the change. She had always known that she was capable of more, but to actually be in charge, to be the one making the decisions, felt surreal. Kendra stood in front of the grand staircase, looking up at the empty, echoing space. The silence was no longer oppressive. It was a reminder of the control she had fought so hard to gain. But as much as she had earned this position, as much as she had worked to get here, there was still a part of her that wondered if she was ready. Could she really live up to the expectations that Vincent had set for her? Could she keep this place running, keep the staff happy, and maintain the delicate balance of power she had just inherited? These were questions she had to answer, and there was no one else to turn to. For the first time, Kendra was on her own. The staff was already looking to her for guidance, and she had to deliver. The next few weeks were filled with challenges, but with each obstacle, Kendra grew stronger. She found herself making decisions with confidence, handling difficult situations with ease. The mansion's atmosphere began to reflect the changes she had implemented. People no longer walked around in fear, unsure of who to trust. Instead, there was a sense of unity, a sense of purpose that had been missing before. The staff respected her, and that respect was returned tenfold. Kendra made sure that no one was left behind. She listened to their concerns, addressed their needs, and treated everyone equally. No longer the invisible maid, Kendra had become a true leader, someone people looked up to and respected. One evening, after a particularly successful dinner party in the mansion, Kendra found herself standing in the grand dining room, surveying the results of her hard work. The guests had been impressed with the service, the atmosphere, and the smoothness of the event. Everything had gone off without a hitch. As she walked out of the room, she felt a sense of pride in the way things had turned out. But as she made her way back to her office, she couldn't help but feel that familiar weight on her chest. Vincent had stepped back, but he hadn't disappeared. His presence was still felt, even in his absence. She knew that he was watching, evaluating her every move, waiting to see if she could truly handle the mansion on her own. She wasn't sure how she felt about that. Part of her wanted to prove to him, and to herself, that she could do this without his help. But another part of her couldn't shake the feeling that she needed his approval. Kendra sighed, pushing the thoughts aside as she entered her office. She had a long night ahead of her, and she needed to focus. The paperwork, the new plans, the adjustments, there was always something to do. As she sat down at her desk, a soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to find Marie, the housekeeper, standing in the doorway. Marie had been with the family for years and had always been a kind, steady presence in the mansion. She had supported Kendra from the beginning, and now, she was looking at Kendra with something like admiration in her eyes. "Kendra," Marie said softly, "I just wanted to say that we all appreciate what you've done here. The mansion feels different now. You've brought a sense of peace, a sense of unity, and we all respect you for that." Kendra was taken aback. She had never expected such words from Marie, who had always been loyal to Vincent. But now, it seemed, she was loyal to Kendra. "Thank you, Marie," Kendra replied, her voice thick with emotion. "That means more to me than you know." Marie nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "You've earned it, Kendra. We all see the change, and we're all behind you." As Marie left, Kendra sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the weight of her words. For the first time, she realized that the staff didn't just see her as the new person in charge. They saw her as a leader, someone who had earned her place. She had done the work. She had earned their trust. And now, she was going to make sure that the mansion, the staff, and everything that she had fought for continued to thrive. The future wasn't certain, but Kendra knew that she was ready. She had been tested, and she had come out stronger for it. The mansion was hers now, and with the staff by her side, she knew that she could lead them into a new era, one where respect, kindness, and collaboration were at the forefront. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was the woman in charge, and she was ready to take on whatever came next. As Kendra stood in the grand hallway of the mansion, the weight of the decisions she had made, and the changes she had brought, seemed to hang in the air around her. The mansion was quieter now, not in the way it had once been, filled with tension and uncertainty, but in a more peaceful, almost serene way. The once oppressive atmosphere had shifted into something lighter, more hopeful. The staff now worked with a sense of camaraderie, a sense of purpose. They looked to Kendra not with fear, but with respect, and that respect had been earned, not handed to her. She had fought for it, proved herself worthy of it. As the new head of the mansion, Kendra had faced her fair share of challenges. There were moments when she questioned her own abilities, moments when she wondered if she was truly capable of handling it all. But with each passing day, those doubts grew smaller, replaced by the confidence that came from seeing the changes she had made. The mansion was now a place where people worked together, where respect and trust were at the forefront. She had created an environment that valued collaboration, not fear. But still, despite all the progress, there was something lingering in the back of Kendra's mind, something that she couldn't shake. Vincent's presence was still felt, even if he had stepped back. He had given her control, But there was always that question hanging in the air. Was this really her success, or had Vincent just let go, allowing her to take the reins? Kendra didn't want to dwell on that thought, but it was hard to ignore. One evening, as she walked through the mansion after another successful event, she passed by Vincent's study. The door was slightly ajar, and she could see him sitting at his desk, papers scattered in front of him, his face lost in thought. For a moment, she considered walking by without acknowledging him, but something inside her made her stop. She knocked softly on the door, and Vincent looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "Kendra," he said, his voice a little more distant than it had been in their last conversation. "Come in." She hesitated, but then stepped inside, her heart racing slightly. She had no idea what this conversation would bring, but she knew it was important. Vincent gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit," he said, his tone a little softer than usual. Kendra sat, her hands folded in her lap, waiting for him to speak. "I've been thinking," Vincent began, his voice thoughtful, "about everything that's happened, about the changes you've made, about how you've handled this place." Kendra stayed silent, watching him carefully. She didn't want to interrupt, didn't want to assume anything. "You've done a good job," Vincent continued. "Better than I thought you would. Better than I gave you credit for." Kendra felt a small surge of pride, but she kept her expression neutral. "I didn't do it for your approval," she said quietly. "I did it because it needed to be done." Vincent's eyes flickered with something like regret, but he didn't say anything for a long moment. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter. "I know," he said, almost to himself. "But you've done more than just manage the staff. You've made this place better. You've made me realize something I hadn't seen before. I had gotten so caught up in the power, in controlling everything, that I didn't notice how much I was hurting the people around me." Kendra's heart softened at his words, but she still felt a wall between them. Vincent had made his choices in the past, and Kendra couldn't just forget that. "I'm sorry for the way I treated you," Vincent said, looking directly at her now. "For what I put you through. I didn't see your worth before, but I see it now." Kendra didn't know how to respond. She had worked so hard to get to this point, but hearing him speak this way was something she hadn't expected. "I appreciate that," she said after a moment, her voice steady. "But I don't need your apology, Vincent. I've already proven what I'm capable of, with or without your approval." Vincent nodded, a small, almost sad smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You're right," he said quietly. "And I won't try to take credit for the changes you've made. You've done this on your own, and that's something I can respect." Kendra sat there, processing his words. She had never imagined a day where Vincent, the man who had controlled her every move, would sit across from her and speak to her like this. It felt like a full circle had been completed, but there was still something in the back of her mind. Was this truly the beginning of something new, or was it just another chapter in a long history of manipulation? "What's next for you?" Kendra asked, breaking the silence. Vincent looked at her, his eyes unreadable. "I don't know," he said softly. "But I know that I can't keep holding on to everything. I've spent so much of my life controlling others, but I can't keep doing that. I've had to let go." Kendra felt a surge of understanding, but there was also a part of her that still wasn't sure. Vincent's words seemed genuine, but it was hard to shake the years of pain, of manipulation. "Do you think you'll be okay?" Kendra asked, her voice softer now. Vincent met her gaze, and for a moment, they shared a silence that said more than words ever could. Finally, he spoke. "I think I'm getting there," he said quietly. "I think I'm finally starting to understand what it means to be free." Kendra nodded slowly, unsure of what the future would bring, but knowing that, for the first time, she wasn't alone in it. The mansion, once a place of fear, had become a place of potential, a place where both of them could finally find the freedom they needed. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Kendra felt ready to face it, whatever it might bring.